It was the summer of 1942, and the world trembled beneath the weight of war. Across the endless blue expanse of the Pacific, two great powers stared at each other through smoke and silence, each preparing for a clash that would decide the fate of oceans, islands, and generations yet unborn. America, still reeling from the sting of Pearl Harbor, was battered but unbroken, its harbors scarred, its ships still smoldering, yet its spirit stubborn as iron. Japan had swept through the Pacific like a storm, capturing one island after another, raising its red sun flag over lands that once felt untouchable, its navy undefeated, its pilots confident that destiny itself sailed with them. The Emperor's forces believed America was too weak, too far, too late, but they didn't know the kind of people they were dealing with. Behind the steel and machinery, behind the ration looks and telegrams, there was something else stirring in the American heart. An anger, a resilience, a defiance that whispered through the factories and shipyards, through every young man who signed his name to fight, through every mother who folded the flag and prayed at the kitchen table. Midway was just a speck on the map, a coral atoll barely large enough to host an airstrip and a few radio towers. But in June of that year, it became the center of the universe. Japan's plan was simple in theory and devastating in practice. They would lure the remaining American carriers into a trap near Midway, destroy them in one decisive blow, and force the United States to the negotiating table. It was strategy polished in Tokyo's war rooms, built on arrogance, wrapped in overconfidence. But in a small, dimly lit room in Pearl Harbor, far from the battlefield, a handful of American codebreakers were about to change everything. They worked without glory, without uniform stained by battle, yet their war was just as fierce. Commander Joseph Rochefort led the team, men who lived off black coffee and cigarette smoke, their eyes red from sleepless nights spent decoding fragments of Japanese radio traffic. They weren't guessing, they were listening, translating, piecing together a puzzle that the enemy didn't even know existed. And then, somewhere in the haze of typewriter clicks and whispered theories, came the clue that turned the tide. AF. The Japanese fleet kept referring to a target they called AF. The question was, where was it? Rochefort suspected it was Midway, but Washington wasn't convinced, so they set a trap of their own. Midway sent out a false radio message claiming its desalination plant had broken down, that the island was running out of fresh water. A few hours later, intercepted Japanese messages reported that AF was short on water. That was all the proof they needed. The enemy was coming to Midway, and for the first time since Pearl Harbor, America knew where they would strike before they did. It wasn't luck, it was brilliance, born from the minds of quiet men who fought their war with logic and courage instead of bullets. Now the pieces began to move. Admiral Chester Nimitz, calm and calculating, looked at his maps and made a decision that would gamble the fate of the Pacific. He had only 3 carriers, Enterprise, Hornet, and the hastily repaired Yorktown, to face a Japanese force twice as large, with more ships, more planes, and more experience. But he had one advantage the Japanese did not. He knew their plan. As the sun rose on June 3rd, the ocean stretched endlessly blue, dotted with the silhouettes of carriers and cruisers moving silently toward destiny. The men aboard knew little of the code-breaking miracle that guided them. They only knew they were outnumbered, outgunned, and out on the edge of the world. Yet they tightened their belts, checked their instruments, and waited for orders. The Japanese fleet, commanded by Admiral Yamamoto, advanced with supreme confidence. They believed the American carriers were still in Pearl Harbor. Their planes would bomb Midway, draw out the U.S. Navy, and crush it. But even the most perfect plan collapses when built on false assumptions. As the first Japanese waves hit Midway's defenses on June 4th, American anti-aircraft guns opened up in defiance, their tracers stitching the sky, and from the tiny airfield, Marine pilots took off to face the incoming swarm. Many never returned. Their planes were slow, outdated, but they flew anyway, into impossible odds, because duty said they must. In the chaos above the atoll, bombs rained down, fires erupted, men screamed, and the air smelled of smoke and salt and courage. But the real battle, the one that would decide everything, was still out at sea, where American carrier pilots waited for the order to strike. They launched in waves, searching vast, empty skies for an enemy that moved like a ghost. The first groups missed entirely, flying for hours without finding a single ship. Many ran out of fuel and ditched into the ocean. Yet fate, in all its cruel symmetry, rewards persistence. One group of torpedo bombers, Torpedo Bomber Squadron 8 from the Hornet, finally found the Japanese carriers. They attacked low and straight, braving machine gun fire and Zero fighters, their old, slow planes crawling across the sky as if defying death itself. Not one of them made it back. Every single pilot in that squadron was shot down. Their torpedoes missed, their planes burned, their bodies fell into the Pacific. But in their sacrifice, they pulled the Japanese fighter cover down to sea level, leaving the skies above the enemy fleet wide open. And at that exact moment, almost as if history itself held its breath, 3 squadrons of American dive bombers appeared high above the clouds. They had stumbled upon the Japanese carriers by pure chance, guided by luck, intuition, and perhaps something greater. The carriers, Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu were below, their decks crowded with fueled planes, bombs being loaded, orders being shouted. The perfect moment. The dive bombers dove. From 20,000 feet they plunged almost vertically, their engines screaming, the pilots' faces tight with focus. The bombs fell, whistling through the air like judgment itself. Seconds later, the Pacific exploded. Flames tore through steel, munitions detonated, men ran for their lives. In a matter of minutes, 3 of Japan's most proud carriers were burning wrecks. Their decks turned to molten chaos. The tide had turned. The 4th carrier, Hiryu, managed to launch a counterattack, striking the Yorktown and crippling her, but the momentum was gone. The next day, American planes found and destroyed Hiryu as well. 4 Japanese carriers, gone. The same 4 that had attacked Pearl Harbor. It was not just revenge, it was redemption. The ocean that had once been Japan's playground now belonged to no one. It was contested, equal, uncertain, alive again with the roar of American engines. Midway had changed everything. When the battle was over, more than 3,000 Japanese sailors were dead, along with hundreds of their best pilots. America lost 1 carrier and a few hundred men, but it had won something far greater: belief. The myth of Japanese invincibility had been shattered. From that moment on, the war began to move westward, island by island, toward Tokyo itself. But yet for all the grand strategy and headlines, it was still a story written by individuals, by the young man who took off knowing he might not return, by the sailor who dragged his wounded friend from the flames, by the codebreaker who never saw the ocean but helped save it. Midway wasn't just a victory of ships or machines. It was a victory of courage, of intellect, of faith under fire. It proved that in the darkest moments, when the odds are hopeless and the sky is falling, ordinary people can still do the impossible. And as the sun set over that scarred blue water, with smoke drifting toward the horizon, America stood taller. It had bled, it had suffered, but it had learned how to fight and win. By the final months of 1945, the Pacific had become a theater dominated utterly by American power. Every Japanese airfield, every naval base, every shipping lane under the unrelenting pressure of carriers, battleships, submarines, and the full complement of American air power. With the once proud Japanese fleet reduced to skeleton formations, its veteran pilots replaced by barely trained recruits, and its industrial capacity shattered by relentless strategic bombing campaigns that reduced cities to rubble and smothered the production of aircraft, munitions, and fuel. While American forces, drawing on the accumulated lessons of Midway, the Solomons, the Marianas, and Iwo Jima, executed campaigns with precision, coordination, and overwhelming firepower. Where every amphibious landing was preceded by naval gunfire that demolished fortifications, every airstrike timed to cripple defenses before troops touched shore, every logistical supply chain engineered to maintain tempo and momentum. And as American B-29s rained incendiary bombs over Tokyo and other industrial centers, The Japanese people faced devastation that no propaganda could sugarcoat. Their cities aflame, their military production crippled, their capacity to resist systematically destroyed. Yet their leaders clung to hope and ideology, even as reality collapsed around them. And it was against this backdrop that the atomic bombings of Hiroshima on August 6th and Nagasaki on August 9th delivered an unprecedented shock, obliterating the cities and leaving tens of thousands dead in an instant. The sheer magnitude of destruction, a force that no conventional military counter could withstand. And in the midst of this cataclysm, Emperor Hirohito intervened directly, ordering surrender to prevent further annihilation of his people, setting in motion the final chapters of a conflict that had begun with the attack on Pearl Harbor, the opening of the Pacific War at Clark Field, and the desperate campaigns across islands and oceans. As Japanese emissaries prepared for the historic voyage to Allied lines aboard the last surviving G-4M transport variants, the so-called White Betty bombers, painted in stark white with green crosses to signal peaceful intent, flying under escort to ensure safe passage to Manila. Their mission, symbolic, deliberate, and heavy with meaning. The very aircraft that had once struck terror into Allied airmen now transformed into instruments of diplomacy, carrying the surrender delegation to meet General MacArthur and representatives of the Allied forces. A journey that closed the circle of the war in the Pacific, reflecting both the destructive capabilities of the aircraft and the calculated risks of its design, where extraordinary range, speed, and payload had once made it a weapon of fear. Yet, unprotected fuel tanks and minimal defensive measures had ensured its vulnerability. And now, in these final flights, those same characteristics underscored the full narrative of human ingenuity, strategic calculation, and the interplay of technology and mortality. As the surrender was formalized and Japan's representatives transferred to American transport, the symbolism of the aircraft, the pilots, and the long, bloody campaigns unmistakable, demonstrating that the war's outcome had been determined not by chance, but by the relentless application of intelligence, production capacity, tactical innovation, and the exploitation of enemy weaknesses. Where every decision from Midway to Okinawa had compounded, each loss teaching lessons that reshaped doctrine, aircraft design, and operational planning. With the legacy of the Betty bomber, its brilliance in design, its catastrophic vulnerabilities, its role in both destruction and surrender, etched indelibly into the record, revealing the stark contrast between American emphasis on crew protection, survivability, and industrial sustainability, and Japanese prioritization of performance, range, and mission accomplishment over the lives of the aircrew, a philosophy that had initially granted tactical advantage but ultimately produced staggering attrition, illustrating the cost of strategic miscalculations and the consequences of disregarding sustained combat realities. While across the Pacific, the decimated Japanese armed forces faced the impossibility of recovery, their remaining aircraft, ships, and personnel unable to resist the overwhelming force and technological superiority of the Allies. And as formal surrender documents were signed, the world witnessed the transition from total war to the dawn of peace, the long night of conflict ending with clear demonstration of the decisive factors: production, intelligence, tactical innovation, and the prioritization of human life in operational planning, cementing lessons that would inform military doctrine for decades to come. While the ashes of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the battered islands, the scarred oceans, and the exhausted veterans served as somber reminders of the price of miscalculation, the ferocity of combat, and the extraordinary interplay of technology and human decision-making. As history recorded the journey from the first strike at Clark Field to the last flight of the White Betty bombers carrying Japan's surrender, a narrative encompassing courage, sacrifice, ingenuity, and the ruthless arithmetic of war,
proving that victory was determined not solely by valor or firepower, but by the accumulation of knowledge, preparation, coordination, and the relentless exploitation of opportunity. Where every lesson learned, every risk calculated, every flaw understood, every innovation applied, from Midway's carriers to the atomic bombings, contributed to the final inexorable outcome. And in this vast panorama of strategy, technology, human endurance, and the tragic calculus of loss, the story of the Pacific War, the rise and fall of the G4M Betty, and the ultimate triumph of Allied forces stood as an enduring testament to the decisive power of foresight, planning, and the human capacity to learn, adapt, and prevail against even the most fanatical and determined adversaries. Where the combination of intelligence, industrial capacity, tactical execution, and moral resolve shaped the fate of nations, ensured the survival of millions, and established the framework for the post-war era. And in the annals of history, the Betty bomber remains both a symbol of tactical ingenuity and a cautionary tale of the human cost when capability is pursued at the expense of survival. While the White Betty flights carrying surrender delegations crystallize the full arc of the Pacific conflict, from the terror of initial attacks to the relief of peace, illustrating the immutable lessons of strategy, sacrifice, and the enduring significance of choices made under the weight of war, echoing across generations as a monument to both human ingenuity and the profound consequences of calculated risk in the theater of global conflict. The final chapter of the Betty story unfolded not just in the skies, but in the meticulous accounting of production, attrition, and human cost, a saga that revealed the sheer scale of Japanese ambition and the brutal arithmetic of war, as Mitsubishi had produced approximately 2,414 G4M bombers across all variants, though some counts rose to 2,435 when including prototypes, subtypes, and transport conversions, the Model 1 alone numbering over 1,172 by early 1943, a machine designed with ruthless precision for range, speed, and payload, yet completely devoid of protective systems that could have saved its crews from near-certain death once American fighter strength matured. While the Model 2 pushed fuel capacity even higher, extending range to levels that no Allied bomber could match at the time, yet remained fatally vulnerable. And by the time Model 3 introduced self-sealing tanks, production had dwindled to 60 or so aircraft, a change too late to affect the outcome. And the G6M transport variants, including the White Betties carrying surrender delegations, numbered a mere 30, symbolically transforming instruments of death into vehicles of diplomacy. A stark reminder that the very attributes that made the Betty feared, the unrelenting range, the speed, the capability to deliver devastating torpedoes and bombs across vast distances, also ensured its mortality in the brutal arithmetic of combat. Where thousands of Japanese airmen, disciplined, courageous, and indoctrinated to accept their fate, climbed into unprotected fuselages knowing that a single hit to wing or fuselage meant fire, explosion, and death, yet flew mission after mission across the Pacific, from Rabual to Guadalcanal, from Truk to Okinawa, often encountering overwhelming American opposition, P-38s, F-4Fs, F-4Us, Hellcats, Corsairs, and countless Allied aircraft whose range, training, and tactics had improved steadily from the early months of 1942, turning once dominant Betty formations into Ziplos, the grim nicknames whispering among American pilots the knowledge that these aircraft ignited at the slightest touch, each raid a testament to Japanese bravery and American tactical evolution. Every interception a reinforcement of the lesson that the very weight saved in omitting armor